knew I should have paid attention in space pilot school. I think I pressed the wrong button, guys. Just give me a second. Durgle's here. I'm so glad I was able to safely crash land that spaceship and get out of that okay. Normally I make gaming videos, but I thought I'd do something different, devoted to one of my more recently acquired hobbies. I used to read a lot when I was younger, mostly just for accelerated reader. I don't know if they still make people do that in school, but then the first 4 or 5 Harry Potter books I really liked, and after that I kind of just didn't really, I lost interest in it. Not that the books got any worse, I just wasn't my cup of tea anymore. Look at my bookmark. Look at this, it's so cool. Space themed too, just like pretty much everything I read now. Sci-fi and space. So I work in an answering service, third shift, 10 at night to 6 in the morning usually is my shift, and it's really slow a lot of the time, so there's nothing better to do but read. I recently started, I rediscovered reading, I guess, in March of 2015, and it's now December 2015. I've been able to read 40-ish books, so I thought I'd make like a little video series about some of my favorite authors and things like that. Not really like book reviews, just more like opinions and, like a guide for if anybody's looking to get into reading and they don't know where to start, or if they read but they're not familiar with these authors and they kind of want to check them out or whatever. Just if you enjoy the videos, thanks for watching, and let's get into it. So I almost exclusively read sci-fi, although I have been meaning to branch out. This first one I wanted to do about Arthur C. Clarke, who's my favorite author and the one I definitely own the most books by. Him and Philip K. Dick and Isaac Asimov are usually referred to as like the Holy Trinity or the trifecta of science fiction. There's also a few other really famous ones like H.G. Wells and Jules Vernon and Robert Heinlein. I've read War of the Worlds and I read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I haven't read anything by Robert Heinlein, but I have a feeling that if you name something that he wrote, I probably would have heard of it at least because he's that famous, especially amongst sci-fi authors. Like one of my other favorite authors actually seemed to have named him as like his favorite author, one of his favorites, and pretty much called him a genius. Like he's like, Robert Heinlein is like a genius writer. So I definitely am meaning to check him out, and he'll probably be the next author I get into. But yeah, I wanted to talk about Arthur C. Clarke, Sir Arthur, sometimes he's referred to as, because he was knighted one time. I'm not sure what he was knighted for, I never bothered to look it up. Probably something to do with the fact that he came up with the idea for satellites. Like, he's basically credited as like being the first person to think of satellites, and then somebody else, along with him and his paperwork and like research or whatever, kind of invented satellites. From what I understand, he's like the first person to think like, hey, we could put something in a Lagrange point around orbit. And Lagrange point being like it's close enough to, but also far enough away from whatever it's orbiting that it doesn't fall off into space, but it doesn't fall towards the like planet or whatever it's orbiting unless it gets hit by like an asteroid or comet or something goes wrong. So basically, it could stay in a stable orbit around the Earth, and I think he was like the first person to think of like, hey, we could put something up there like with radio waves or whatever, and use it as a communications relay or something like that. So that's my general understanding without ever having looked up any of the stuff of how he is credited with inventing satellites. But I'll start with the first book I read by him, which is one of my favorite books ever. It's tied with one of actually like one of the few non-sci-fi books I read, which I'll talk about in a different episode. But City and the Stars, or The City and the Stars. Can't read it because it's backwards. And yes, that is a naked man with his butt out. That's not at all relevant to the book, from what I remember. But, sometimes cover art artists kind of just go off and do their own thing. But the giant emerald is actually a city, and that actually is relevant to how the author describes it. And then the background, there's, I think, either Mars or a reddish colored moon. I don't remember. It's been a long time since I read this, so I can't remember if that's really relevant. I'll read the back of the book for you. He was the first child to be born on Earth for at least 10 million years, and because he was so different from the others in the city, he set out to prove what they all denied, that life existed outside their fabulous metropolis and that man could survive in the mysterious outer world. And so the last adventurer left the city to find the stars. Super futuristic. I had to keep reminding myself it was written in the 50s. I think it was originally written in 53, but that was like a slightly different or slightly shorter version, and then he rewrote it in 56. And that's the version I have. And I think this printing was like the second printing or something in 57. I had to keep reminding myself it was written in the 50s because it's so super futuristic, even by today's standards. Like, for example, it starts off with like what's a description basically of like an online virtual reality video game that these people are playing. Like they're all levitating in these beds in their houses or their apartments with like these headsets on that connect them to the internet to each other, and they go on these adventures that other people have like programmed or made, and like people are always programming and making new adventures to go on. I think he I think he refers to them as like Hollow something, Hollow Adventures or something. But yeah, he was way ahead of his time. And I kept wondering to myself, like, why isn't he using the word video game? Why isn't he using the word internet? And it occurred to me finally, I was like, duh, it was written in the 50s. That stuff wasn't around back then. So he was probably looked at as a crazy man by some people and just super imaginative by others. Obviously, he was super imaginative. Um, but aside from that, I'm going to avoid spoilers. Basically, it's about there's one city on Earth, and this guy's the first person to be born because people are pretty much immortal, but won't get into the details of it. But he's basically the first person to be born, and he is the only person who's not satisfied. He wants to leave the city, but everybody's like, "There's nothing out there. It's dangerous, or and it's illegal to leave the city." But he wants to leave the city, and I think the first printing of it ever actually had like a cover art of like a hand reaching out through like a cliche kind of jail cell, like the iron bars, and in the sky you can see like a giant star, and like in a perfect circle around it there's like all these other like different colored stars, and it just looks so awesome. And that's kind of what he ends up seeing at one point early on in the book, and he's like, I need to leave the city. There's some other stuff too of why he wants to leave and why he thinks there's something else out there, but I won't get into it. Towards the end it gets like Mass Effect epic, if not more so. Like it kind of reminds you of that whole like everything's on a super huge cosmic scale, like how important everything is. So it's really cool. It's my favorite book by far. It's only 191 pages, but page length can be kind of arbitrary because of text size and like indenting and page size and super big chapter headings sometimes in some books, and some authors do what I call like macro chapters, where they do like part one and then they'll have like a divider page and like an emblem and a different title for that part, and they might do like 3 to 10 parts in a book or something like that with different chapters. So page numbers can be kind of arbitrary, but this is definitely my favorite book, and you should definitely read this. The Songs of Distant Earth. Second book I read by him, I believe. Yeah, second book I read by him. Another one of my very favorite books, although I don't know, this one doesn't really feel like it has like a real dramatic central conflict or anything like that. It's pretty peaceful for the most part. There is some drama, don't get me wrong, but it's still like, nevertheless, it's really interesting to read. And let's see, I'll read the back of the book for you just because it does it best, and I can't really describe it any better without giving away spoilers and stuff. Just a few islands in a planet-wide ocean, Thalassa was a veritable paradise, home to one of the small colonies founded centuries before by robot motherships when the sun had gone nova and mankind had fled Earth. Mesmerized by the beauty of Thalassa, I might be pronouncing that differently than some people. It's Thalassa. And overwhelmed by its vast resources, the colonists lived in an idyllic existence, unaware of the monumental evolutionary events slowly taking place beneath their seas. Then the Magellan arrived in orbit, carrying 1 million refugees from the last mad days on Earth, and suddenly uncertainty and change had come to the placid paradise that was Thalassa. It's hard not to say it's my favorite book. It's not, but it's definitely up there. It's basically about like this planet that's mostly water. It's more water than land, and then there's a few like kind of close islands. And these people, they're ancestors of people that had fled from, like it says, the Earth that when the sun was about to go supernova. And they're just like one of many colonies apparently. And this is like 300 years later, I think, is when it takes place after the Earth supposedly, or after they left Earth. So this is like the great great grandchildren of those colonists who were cryogenically frozen in their spaceships, and they've formed their own culture and stuff, and all they know of Earth is stuff that they've seen in like videos and like documents and stuff that were brought with them on the spaceship. But then they get visitors from Earth who were from Earth more recently than their ancestors, and they update them on what's happened and stuff, and you're like, why are you here? So that's kind of what this book is about, and it's really, really cool. Check it out, Songs of Distant Earth. Childhood's End is the novelization of a short story by Arthur C. Clarke called Guardian Angel. I actually forgot to mention that Songs of Distant Earth was a novelization of a short story he had written too that was same name, Songs of Distant Earth, but I'll get to that in a second. But this, the Childhood's End, let's see. This is one of my favorites. I think it's probably one of the more well-rounded books I've ever read, like as far as like the plot and everything. Like it has the right amount of mystery, but it also has the right amount of giving you answers. And it's basically about like aliens show up one day, like in spaceships above like all the most major cities of the planet. I think it describes them as like giant, like elliptical, kind of like silver cigar-shaped UFOs. But they never show themselves. They go through like a diplomat that they've designated like the only human that they will directly speak to. Other than that, they make like radio broadcasts, I think, or like something like that, and they sound human, I believe, or like people's minds interpret it, like they hear it kind of like telepathically. I don't remember exactly, but they deal with one person that they make like their human alien diplomat, and the people end up referring to them as the overlords. And people get restless after a few years of this. Like the aliens basically like give them everything they could ever want. Like they cure all the world's like financial issues, and place is basically like a paradise because everybody can afford to do whatever they want. Nobody has to really work if they don't want to. Really, like it's sort of perfect. But people get restless and they're like, why won't they show themselves to us? And what are they hiding? At least certain people do. There's like factions of people. But it's a really cool book. I definitely won't spoil it for you. You kind of just have to read it for yourself. Again, with all of these books. And yeah, Childhood's End. Cover art. I don't know. My verdict on the cover art. It's not terrible. It's not. I don't know. It's sort of fitting. I'll just put it that way. It's sort of fitting. Whoa, that's a big book. Yeah, the collected stories of Arthur C. Clarke. About 1,000 pages. It's pretty much every short story he's ever written, I guess, like most of them anyways. Some of them, like, I guess, like publishers and editors had gone back and found for him after a lot of struggle, because he had almost forgotten about some of these. Like, he wrote for so many years, and he wrote a lot of stuff. But yeah, it's got the Guardian Angel and Songs of Distant Earth that were later novelized, and it's called The Sentinel, which I believe was later used as as the inspiration for the beginning of 2001: A Space Odyssey, which he co-wrote that movie, by the way, with Stanley Kubrick. And I'll get to that in a second too, because I have that book series. But it's got a lot of short stories. Like I said, almost 1,000 pages. Some are like, I think they're called like Tales from the White something. I don't remember what it's called, but it's like a bar where these scientists that all like work at these different classified type projects, they get together and sometimes they get to talking about really interesting stuff that's happened with like new inventions and stuff. And those ones are a little bit more comical in nature, which is kind of nice because some of the other ones are a little bit more dramatic in nature. A lot of them deal with like astronauts and like what it would be like to live and work on like the moon or space station and stuff like that. But it might sound boring to some people, but it's actually really interesting the way he writes it. And then a lot of times he'll have like some sort of conflict or something to make it even more interesting. But I highly recommend it if you're into short stories or science fiction. And some of them even kind of remind me a little bit of Lovecraft, even though Lovecraft was more strange fiction or supernatural horror, or whatever you want to call it. But I think he read Lovecraft because I have one of Lovecraft's books where there's like a quote from Arthur C. Clarke like praising Lovecraft's writing. So I think he read Lovecraft. But somewhat reminds me of that because like he's really good at coming up with like fake names and dates and events and stuff that sound really believable and realistic. It sounds almost as if somebody's reporting on it, not telling a story almost sometimes. Others are different though. And some of them are a little bit more like fantasy-ish, kind of. Not really, but like a little bit. But I definitely recommend checking it out. Space Odyssey. I was just talking about that. The movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, co-written by Arthur C. Clarke and Stanley Kubrick. Around the same time that I think Arthur C. Clarke had started writing the book. There's some differences between the book and the movie. Basically, the major and most notable difference is everything that happens in the movie around Jupiter happens around Saturn in the book, which I guess was due to like technical things. And at the time, they didn't have, that movie was made in like the 60s, I think. They didn't have really accurate, good visuals of Saturn's rings, and they didn't really know exactly how to make them in special effects like look proper, and they didn't want to get it wrong. So they did Jupiter. I think it ends up in the long run working out, because in the second book, 2010, Odyssey Two, I think Arthur C. Clarke actually has like an author's note where he decided to switch it back to Jupiter to kind of go in line with the movie, and because there's other reasons I think, but Jupiter works out better than Saturn in the long run for the series. First two books are awesome. A lot of people probably don't even know there is a second movie based on 2010, and I think I like the second movie better. Like the second movie, well, it's directed by someone different than Stanley Kubrick, which everybody loves Stanley Kubrick, obviously, but I don't know. The second one, I think feel like it's a little bit easier to interpret. It's not quite as mystical and out there, and it really accurately follows the book. Third one, 2061 Odyssey 3, really cool cover. Book itself, probably the weakest one of the four. It's not a bad book by any means. It's interesting, but it feels mostly all like B-roll stuff. Like there is a central conflict and everything, but it doesn't feel very urgent to me, at least. And it feels most like they just like a bunch of different little stories of like this, of what it would be like basically to be on a space cruise is kind of what most of the book entails. And then 3001, the Final Odyssey, which I've heard, I don't know if it's true or not, but I've heard Ridley Scott, director of Alien and a lot of other stuff, is working on making this into a miniseries. So that'd be really cool. To be honest, it's been a while. I remember some of the stuff that happened in this, but I don't remember a lot. I do remember the end though. And people that want concrete, definitive answers and stuff might be a little upset. I liked it. I was happy with it. It's a little vague, but it still answers some things, kind of. It's one of those things. But that's the Space Odyssey series. So we just did Space Odyssey. This is a time odyssey. Not really directly sequels or anything like that. I think Arthur himself called it orthoquils. I think ortho means like perpendicular or something in Greek. But basically it means it's kind of like branching. It's like its own universe, but it has a lot of the same atmosphere and sort of feel, but it's very different. Like the stuff it talks about in the settings and everything, it's very different than Space Odyssey. But it does have the same kind of feel where there's like weird alien artifacts and like this whole mystery of like, what are these aliens trying to do? First one deals with time travel, Time's Eye, obviously a time odyssey. All these, by the way, are co-written with Stephen Baxter, who I believe was a trained engineer with degrees from Cambridge and Southampton, and he's his own sci-fi author too. He's won a lot of awards, including the Philip K. Dick Award, and he was nominated for an Arthur C. Clarke, and a lot of others. He's also British, just like Arthur. But Time's Eye deals with like basically a bunch of different soldiers. There's the Greek army with Alexander the Great. There's Mongols, Genghis Khan. There's some soldiers from the most current year. The characters are basically like the main characters. I think it's like 2071 or something like that. They're like UN soldiers, and then there's some like kind of 17th or 18th century British soldiers with like muskets and stuff. And there might be a few others, but basically all these different time periods. Like the Earth is basically a jigsaw of all these different time periods. Like it just happens one day, and they're trying to figure out what the heck's going on and how they can get back home. And it's really cool. It's a really cool epic story. You should definitely read it, especially if you're into like historical fiction. It's a little bit less like it has definitely sci-fi aspects, but it's if you're into like history and historical things, it'll probably be interesting to you. Like to see like historical figures in a different light, sort of. And then Sunstorm is the second one. This one deals with a lot of the same characters and stuff. I won't tell how it happens or why it happens, but basically they figure out there's a sunstorm approaching, something that could potentially kill all life on the planet. And how are they going to stop it? How are they going to do to prevent it? I like this one a little bit better than the first one, just because I'm not as into history as some people. And I think like their theory for defending the Earth actually it sounds incredible, but it sounds feasible as well, like the way they come up with it. I won't spoil what that is. And then this one, the cover art is very reminiscent of 3001: A Space Odyssey, but the last one is Firstborn, which Firstborn is, it's not really a spoiler, it's the name that they've given the alien intelligence behind the weird artifacts and events. And this one kind of gives you more of like a conclusion to the first two books and like some of the greater conflict that starts in the first book and kind of ends the whole mystery. And this one is a little bit less of a vague ending than Space Odyssey, but it's still a little bit vague. So some people that aren't happy with like non-concrete answers would be a little upset, but I really enjoyed the series. I think I liked it even better than Space Odyssey. I liked Space Odyssey a lot too, so that's saying something. Last one. This is definitely going to be the longest video by far because, like I said, I own more books by Arthur C. Clarke than any other author. And this is my first video, and I'm really bad at public speaking, so thanks for bearing with me if you're still watching or if you're still interested at all. The Rama series. My favorite book series so far. Definitely, I like it better than Space Odyssey. I like it better than Time Odyssey. And for those people that, like I keep saying, like Space Odyssey and Time Odyssey have kind of vague endings. This one's a lot more direct. It still has some ambiguity. I can't say that word. Ambiguity and mystery to it. But it does do a good job of giving you answers. On the first one, Rendezvous with Rama. He never intended, or necessarily from the start, to write a book series. He just kind of wrote this by itself, which it works really well by itself, just as a book, the way it ends. But then he goes on. It also sets up the potential for sequels too, so it kind of works both ways. If you could just read this by itself and never read the rest of the series and probably be content. But I really do recommend reading the rest of the series. It starts off basically like, to prevent asteroid disasters and stuff, they have like this sort of space patrol thing that monitors large asteroids that are near Earth. And they end up finding this artifact heading towards Earth. It's the biggest asteroid they've ever seen, like on their radars and whatever. But as it gets closer, they see it's not an asteroid. It's like this giant black cylinder, like bigger than some cities and bigger than any asteroid that they've ever seen. And it's clearly like gotta have been designed by an alien intelligence. And they're like, well, what the heck is it? And they go, they send an astronaut team on a spaceship to go explore it. And that's basically what it's about, and it's really cool. Second one, the next three books he all co-wrote with Gentry Lee, who is, I believe he was a chief of something to do with like space probe launching at NASA at some point, and he also went on to write like his own, I think, like non-fiction type books and maybe a few science fiction books. But Arthur C. Clarke and Gentry Lee, Rama 2. I really like this cover. Basically, I'm not going to tell you what this one's about because it kind of spoils it. You look up what the first book is about, and if you decide you want to read that, and then you'll already kind of know what the next 2 or 3 books are going to be about. Then there's The Garden of Rama. Basically, it deals with them trying to figure out again what or who are these aliens and what's going on, and there's like this pretty cool adventure that they have. And then Rama Revealed. This one kind of gives you all the answers to questions that some of the other books set up. Not that the other books give you some answers along the way, like little stuff to keep you happy. But this one's just like, by the time you get to the end of this book, you're like, finally, I have answers. But it does a really good job, like with the character development. Like I didn't expect, like I started reading most of these books by Arthur C. Clarke. I was just like, I just was interested in the whole mysterious story of alien intelligences and stuff that he set up. But like halfway through the books, you're really drawn into these characters that he's created and like the relationships with each other and whether they live or die and that sort of thing. So I was really attached to these books, and I was like, my eyes were kind of watery when I finished this one. Rama, which again is a really cool cover. I like the cover art on these. Who is it? Let's see. I forget the name. It's one of the Yule brothers. Stephen Yule. Youll. Love his cover art. But yeah, thank you for watching. Arthur C. Clarke. Go check him out if you're at all interested in reading sci-fi.